In this recording, I'm going to be taking a look at just a couple examples about graphing a quadratic. Now by quadratics, I'm talking about any equations that have something squared in them. Whenever you see that the equation has squared in it, it tells you that your graph is going to be that U-shaped graph, which is actually a parabola by the formal name. It's called a parabola. And so what we're going to be doing then with this is we're going to be making that graph, and it's just a matter then of knowing where do we start. And that's determined by the transformations that are inside of our equation here, that plus 7 and the minus 8. So first up, let's see what that plus 7 is going to do. Notice the plus 7 is in with the x. At any time you have something added or subtracted inside with x, it tells us that the graph is being moved in the x direction, which is the horizontal. Now, plus 7, this is the one that sometimes seems a little backwards from what we would expect. Plus actually tells it to move to the left. It would only move to the right if it was actually a minus inside with x. So plus moves it to the left, so we know we're going to be taking our graph and moving to the left 7. And then we hit the minus 8 on the end. The minus 8 on the end, anytime we add or subtract something on the end like this, it's going to be moving it up or down. That is, in the y direction. This is the one that actually is more intuitive. Minus actually will indeed move it down. So, in order to be able to graph this then, normally I'd have my first point here at 0, 0. If it was just plain old x squared, I'd start at 0, 0. But since this one has that plus 7, I'm actually going to be moving that to the left 7. And then that minus 8, that tells me to move down 8. That tells me that I'm then going to be moving it down 8. So this is where my first point is actually going to be located. Once I have that first point, I'm just going to follow the pattern that I always do when I'm graphing y equals x squared. The only difference is that instead of starting here at the middle, I'm starting at this point instead. So, in order to graph x squared, whatever I go over, I square it. So for instance, if I go over 1, 1 squared is 1. So that would tell me to go over 1 and up 1 to get to that point. So I'm going to go over 1 and up 1, and I can plot that point. And remember, this is going to be that U-shaped graph. It's symmetrical. That is, it's the same on the left and on the right. So if I go over 1, up 1 on the right, I can also go over 1, up 1 on the left. All right, next up, let's go over 2 next. If I go over 2, then I need to go up 2 squared, because of course this is a squared equation, it's a quadratic. 2 squared is 4. So that tells me to go over 2 and up 4 to get to that next point. And of course I do the same thing on both sides once again. All right, now that I've done that one, I can now go over 3. Well, if I go over 3, I have to go up 3 squared, which, remember, squaring something means doing it times itself. 3 squared is 9, because 3 times 3 is 9. And so I'm going to go over 3 and up 9, and go ahead and count those out and plot that point on both sides. Now for this one, it looks like I might have room to actually plot another point. So let's go ahead and get another point in there. What if I go over 4? Well, then I have to go up 4 squared. Well, 4 times 4 is 16. So that means I would have to go over 4 and then up 16. Count it out. And then once you do that, you should end up plotting a point that's over 4 and up 16 to be right up here. Now in this case though, there's not a spot left for me to do that over here on the left. Theoretically there is a point right there, but it's off our grid, so we don't need to plot that one. So now that I have my points plotted, I can go ahead and I can draw the curve that goes through those points. And so we end up with this as our graph. Now the points were used in order to be able to see where that curve went, but remember, the curve itself is the graph. If we were asked just to plot points, then we would just give those dots that we plotted. But since we're actually being asked to graph this equation, I'm mainly interested here just in the curve. The points are used as guides, but they're not part of the final graph. Just a little bit of detail-y stuff there. All right, for our second example that we're going to run through, you can see that we're going to be dealing with the equation y equals x minus 1 squared plus 4. Once again, it's squared. Therefore, we know that it's going to be a U-shaped graph again, that parabola. And so it's just a matter of where are we going to start. Well, first up, let's see what the -1 is going to do. Now the -1, it's inside with x here. Therefore, we know it's going to be moving it in the x direction. Minus shifts it to the right. So already I know my graph is going to start right 1. But we also have the +4 there. The +4 hanging on the end, that's the one that moves it in the y direction, moves it up or down. And this is intuitively. That is, a plus does indeed move it up. It's the left-right one that is backwards from the way most people think about it. But up and down happens the way that you would expect it to. So this tells me then that I'm going to be starting by going right 1 and up 4, and then that gets me to my very first point. So that's where you're going to want to plot your first point. That is the most important thing when you go to make this graph. It's all about where do we put that first point, because once I have that drawn, I follow the same pattern I always do for graphing a quadratic. And that is, whatever I go over, I square it, because our equation is squared. So 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to go over 1 and up 1. 2 squared is 4. So that means I'm going to go over 2 and up 4. 3 squared is 9. Well, that would take me off my graphing grid here, so I'm not going to have anything to plot there. In fact, the only things I can plot are the over 1 and up 1. It's just I can do that on both sides. Remember to do it on the left as well. And the over 2 up 4, again, on both sides. Once you have those points plotted, you can see where your graph goes. So now you can go ahead and draw the curve that goes through those points, and you have your graph. And that one is done.